Welcome to the U.S. latest news channel. Watch the video to the end to find out the current and breaking news about the Russian war in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin recently stated at a meeting of the UN Security Council that the intensive attacks they have carried out in Kiev and other cities are in retaliation for the attack on the strategic Crimean Bridge, which Ukraine has carried out. Vladimir Putin has taken a stand expressing his pride in the massive offensive movement they have launched across Ukraine. According to statements from Ukrainian officials, it was announced that the large-scale offensive movement that began on Monday by taking the capital Kiev to the center continued unabated in at least 10 regions of Ukraine. The attacks were reportedly carried out with unmanned aerial vehicles and missiles. It was also announced that 11 people lost their lives and there were many injured. Among the information obtained is that the attacks also decimated important energy facilities in some regions. Power outages are still ongoing in some important areas. U.S. President Biden, on the other hand, announced that he condemned these attacks, in which civilians were killed and injured in response to Russia's heavy bombing movements, and targets that had no military purpose were destroyed. In the Polish government, he is one of the giants who closely follows the Ukrainian-Russian war. After Russia announced that it would deploy a joint regional group with Belarus, the Polish government announced that it advised its citizens located in Belarus to leave its territory by available commercial and private means. Belarusian leader Aleksandr Lukashenko announced at a meeting with military chiefs that they should not rely on the large number of soldiers sent by the Russian armed forces, but that they would not be limited to just 1,000 soldiers in total, according to a report published in the Belarusian State news agency BELTA. He said that in the near future they will take part in the army and should be deployed to the necessary areas. Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Khrenin announced that the plans that Belarus has made all this time will be put into practice if even 1 square meter of Belarus is subjected to occupation. Lukashenko has been a loyal supporter of Vladimir Putin during this war, which has been going on for 8 months. As is known, Russian President Vladimir Putin began the first invasion movements against Ukraine on February 24th. During this time, some of the Russian troops used to attack Ukraine, including the troops occupying the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, had decamped from the neighboring state of Belarus. However, it had been stated in previous statements that Belarusian forces would not be included in the Ukrainian war. Ukrainian Air Force spokesman Yuriy Ihnat said in an interview with RBC Ukraine newspaper that 2 Iranian-made Shahed unmanned aerial vehicles, previously known to have been taken by Russia, were shot down in the Kiev region. According to Yuriy Ihnat, the drones were launched from the territory of Belarus, he said. According to reports, it was pointed out that these drones were the first drones known to have been launched from a country that is not officially a party to the conflict. According to a statement made last week, the Regional Directorate of the Regional Defense Forces of Western Ukraine announced that Russia may have transported at least 20 Iranian-made unmanned aerial vehicles to Belarus. The Belarusian Foreign Ministry recently issued a note to the Ukrainian ambassador to Minsk IRKYZYM stating that Ukraine is planning an attack against Belarus. The note was reported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine. The Ukrainian state explained that this was put forward purely to blame Ukraine, that it had no real stake. He said that the Belarusian people should not worry about the note and should not listen to propaganda. This statement was reported by the Diplomatic Institution of Ukraine. World public opinion is very uneasy about the expansion of the war. It seems that the spread of the war to other countries will harm the civilian population more. In the process of this bloody war that has been going on for 8 months, many civilians have lost their lives. Recently, we have seen that the size of the attacks has gradually increased. It seems that a compromise will not be realized anytime soon. World War II is following closely. The border countries are worried that the war will spread to other countries. As is known, Russia's invasion of Ukraine took place on February 24th, 2022 at around 6:00 Moscow time. Shortly after the start of the war, Russian tanks crossed the border and flocked to the Donbass region. However, the sounds of explosions began to rise in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, in the morning. In addition, officials in the United States suggested that soon after the war began, Russia was ready to begin a full-scale invasion movement into Ukraine that would not be limited to the Donbass. After the stunning statements of the officials taking part in the United States, which kept the world on its toes, the response from Ukraine was not delayed. Volodymyr Oleksandrovich Zelensky, who has made it clear that his country is under attack, stated that the Russian forces have moved to a state of total occupation. In addition, both NATO countries and the United States have stated that forces should be joined with Ukraine in response to Russia's military buildup. Quite big crises have occurred between NATO countries, which have expressed decisively that they will help Ukraine in the face of Russian President Vladimir Putin. At the White House in the United States, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki held a press conference at which the United States' attitudes towards Ukraine were discussed on the table. In the Ukraine crisis, which is falling on the agenda as a bombshell, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that the probability that Ukraine could be invaded by Russia at any moment is quite high. In addition, the recent diplomatic traffic and the fact that the two leaders held talks together with their staffs took place without result. Both the Russian army staffs and the Ukrainian army staffs met in Turkey with the decisiveness of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan under the leadership of Turkey. In particular, as a result of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's neutral attitude and moderate approach to the Ukrainian crisis, Russia has somewhat reduced its influence in its large nuclear power, which was put on the table as a possible situation in the war. But the tension at the border continued to increase day by day. Press on the images, and they are published many social media applications. Some particular publications, the Russian army is only about 60 miles from the Ukrainian border that are connected to the snipers' mini fire drills that belong to Russia, and at the same time they do two short-range ballistic missile system of Ukraine were taken to the border. In addition, as soon as Russia declared war on Ukraine, a large number of Russian army tanks began to advance to the Donbass region. On the other hand, the route of the missiles and where the Russian missiles will be deployed were not shared by any news channel. Russian soldiers flocked to Rostov under the leadership of Russian President Vladimir Putin. On the other hand, tens of thousands of Russian troops have flocked to Ukraine under the leadership of Russian President Vladimir Putin. In addition to all this, these videos that are being published on social media platforms, in which Russian soldiers are conducting target practice, have begun to scare the whole world. After Russia's attack on Ukraine, the UK has said it is sending weapons to Ukraine to defend itself against Russia. British Defence Minister Ben Wallace also devoted important statements to the crisis in order to strengthen Ukraine's defense against Russia. They stated that they sent short-range anti-tank missiles to Ukraine by the UK. In addition, it should be especially stated that in 2014, the UK had already pledged to strengthen the Ukrainian army shortly after Russia invaded Crimea. For this reason, the UK has kept its promise by sending military support to Ukraine. In addition, the UK has not only sent weapons or short-range anti-tank missiles in support of Ukraine. At the same time, as a result of Russia sending approximately 100,000 Russian troops to the Ukrainian border, British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is wasting no time. IBY meeting with the British deputies in small groups. The British decided to send soldiers to Ukraine. The British soldiers who went to Ukraine in small groups will also provide training to the Ukrainian army. Russian President Vladimir Putin's plans for Ukraine are almost mind-boggling. The war began 8 months ago. No clear result has yet emerged in the war that has begun with the attacks of Russia on February 24, 2022. However, tensions between the two countries have been decaying for months. Vladimir Putin is also extremely determined not to listen to anyone who condemns him with harsh language. In addition, it is not even a matter of SCH that we use a clear statement that Russian Minister of State Vladimir Putin will completely take over Ukraine when the war will end. In addition, Khrenin said that they had lost Russian soldiers in the field seriously in recent weeks. After the Kremlin's striking statement, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that he had decided to announce a partial mobilization in recent months in order to take action in a short time and increase the number of troops. However, all the sanctions against the Russian economy continue to show their effect unabated. Recently, the United States had expressed a request to October to send additional military support to Ukraine. In particular, it should be stated that this situation has made Russian President Vladimir Putin very angry. The whole world is wondering quite a lot what kind of policy Putin will impose on the United States. Russian ambassador to Washington Anatoly Antonov stressed and stated that the aid move made by the United States is a very big threat to Russia. On the other hand, the U.S. Department of Defense announced on Tuesday that it would provide additional military assistance of $625 million to Ukraine. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video to be informed of the developments at the speed of light.